Hi guys. Right now, being a beginner, making videos for beginners by beginners, blah, 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 I should really start right at the beginning. However, I'm going to go a little slightly advanced for my second video purely because it helps me. I should really be talking about brushes and paints and things like that. Now, what I'm going to do today is show you how to make a wet palette, and the reason I'm going to do this as a second video is because I use a wet palette. When I teach you about paints, I'm going to be saying put some paint in the palette, blah, 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 mix water. Blah, blah. Now, using a dry palette, using a wet palette is slightly different, as I've discovered. So what I'm going to do is, because I use a wet palette, I'm going to do all of the instructional videos on a wet palette, and if I don't show you how to do a wet palette, you're either going to have to go out and find out yourself, or you're just going to sit there and go, oh. So, right, wet palette. A basics of a palette is that you have some kind of waterproof material. As you see, this one's been used, but you see, this is a little kiddie's palette, and I take this with me if I'm traveling because it's just small and convenient, and this cost £1 from the range. If you haven't heard of the range, you look it up. They've got some absolutely fantastic videos for their adverts. This one's even got a little stand for your paintbrushes. So basically what you do is you put your paint on there. I suppose everybody's seen an artist with their big palette and they put a bit of paint on and then they put another colour, and then they can use that to mix the paints up, which is basically what this does. The disadvantage with this is because it's all out in the open and acrylics are water based. Once the air hits it, it starts to dry very, very quickly. Now, you can go out and buy what's called a wet palette, which is basically you've got a spongy material with water, or depending on what you use, you might want to use thinners, or you might want to use filtered water, whatever. Because I tend to use either model colour or citadel paints, I tend to use filtered water, plus the fact that the spongy bit is actually going to act as a filter anyway. So what you do is you have, on top of that spongy material, you've got another piece of paper which is very slightly porous. That acts as your palette, and what you're doing is it's sitting above the layer of water, and the water is keeping the paint moist. And what I've personally found is that you will use between a third and a quarter of the paint that you normally use by using a wet palette. There are disadvantages with using a palette, which is why you see I've used my palette at times. Now, a wet palette, what does it cost? I've seen them on sale for £10, 20 quid. I've seen them as high as £50. Now, it's my Wickham Wanderers mug again. As I've stated in my previous video, I'm a tight ass. So I have managed to get the cost of a wet palette down to 51 pence. Yes, you hear correctly, 51 pence. So this is how you make it. First thing, you need a sealable box, and it has to be sealable, as airtight as you can get it. The reason it's airtight is because once you put your paints inside, obviously, you can actually put the lid on, you can walk away, go to the toilet, have a cigarette, go to bed for 8 hours, come back, that paint will still be usable, and that's because obviously it's airtight. Now, this box, 51 pence is a very slight lie. I actually got 2 for £1 from a pound shop. So this is effectively 50 pence. So what you then do is you get some kitchen roll, which I haven't put a cost value on this because most people have kitchen roll lying around. And then what you want to do, I folded mine into, I'll just say one thing about this box. Get a box as shallow as you can. And the reason you want it shallow is because you're going to be dipping your paint in, your brush in. So if you've got a very tall box, then obviously you're going to be dipping your paint in like this. This is as shallow as I could find it. It's a little bit taller than I'd like, maybe twice as high, but I can get my paintbrush in there very easily. It just means that if I want to get one side and then I want to get the other, I'm going to have to just turn it around. So it's not a problem. That's perfect for me. Now, the next stage, get your tissue paper. I folded mine in 4 because I can't be bothered cutting it too much. And also with me, 1/4 is exactly the width of the box. My tissue, my kitchen roll, it's one of those posh ones, and they give you sheets rather than square, so it is going to come out rectangular. So what I then need to do, obviously, is cut it so it's square, and then I know once it's square, it will go in. So what we're going to do is we're going to pretend that I put that in there. So we'll pretend I've cut that, ignore the side. Now, the next thing you want to do is you want to wet that tissue paper, not tissue paper, kitchen roll. And you want to wet it so that it's damp, but not wet. If you can see any of the water, if you can push it and it squidges, there's probably too much water in. That's not a problem. You can either start again or you can just leave the lid off and wait for the water to evaporate. In all good Blue Peter fashion, here's one I prepared earlier. Now you'll see, obviously from the colour of it, that it is wet, and I don't know where the microphone is, but you can see I've touched the tissue paper, and my fingertips are damp, but they're not soaking, and that's probably about right. But the best thing really to do, and you see I'm not actually cut that quite right. So you see, if it's too wet, you'll know your paint will be really thin, and then if it's too dry, it's going to dry the paint out. You will learn over time. It is literally just trial and error. The next thing you want, and this did cost me £1 from the pound shop, baking paper. You see I've got an 8-metre roll there for £1. Do not get greaseproof paper, because greaseproof paper is waterproof. You want baking paper, because baking paper is slightly porous and it will just absorb the water. Now, this is an 8-metre roll, and you'll see I've got a little tab on there. I'm actually just made my second pallet. I cut a piece off there about 2 weeks ago, and I've used it, and it's got dirty now, and I've replaced it. So that's how long it's going to last you. So you want to cut a square off about the size of your tub, and just lay it in there, and try not to get too many bubbles. Try and get the paper touching the tissue paper. And then you may want to just pop a little bit of water. This is difficult to show. I'm just going to put a little bit of water in, and because my camera is terrible, I'm just going to wet the top surface, not by much, just to get it damp. It just, rather than waiting for the water to come up through the top, what we're doing is we're putting water on top which will seep through, and that is your wet palette. Now you'll see colours in there, that's where it's actually bled through, but it's cost me, I say 51 pence, because a sheet of kitchen paper and some baking paper hasn't cost me more than 1p, has it? So, tight fitting lid, one box. In another video I will show you how it works, but basically you use that as a palette. What is how much? 10 minutes. I'll probably leave it at that. But yeah, that's my palette. Now the reason I've made this is because I'm going to show you in another video how to use paints, why you thin them down, when you don't thin them down, difference between base paints and layer paints, and setting yourself up so that you can blend colours. And I use this, so that's going to be easier. So I'll leave it at that. I haven't totally thought about what my next video is going to be, so I'll leave it as a surprise. Take care.